Rerun! Rerun!
Yeah, right?
What is this turkey doing in that chair?
Last time I looked, it was watching Charlie's Angels.
That's not funny, Rerun.
Sorry, Raj. It's supposed to be in the refrigerator. Mrs. Hudson asked me to keep it for her because her refrigerator's broken.
Playing the good neighbor again, huh, Rerun?
Hey, Raj, I wouldn't have left it in the chair, but I had to run upstairs and feed Mrs. Sandler's tropical fish.
Tropical fish?
Yeah, Mrs. Sandler says I have to feed them before 3 o'clock or they'll just help themselves.
Help themselves to what?
Each other.
That's sad the way fish eat each other, especially when there's only 2 of them, and then the one who ate the other has no one to play with. Poor little guy.
If you're done feeling sorry for the fish, I have a test tomorrow, so can I have some peace and quiet?
Sure.
Thank you. What is this box doing here?
Oh, this belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence in 4A. They asked me if they could keep their silverware here while they were on vacation.
Yeah, that's my roommate, Mr. Nice Guy.
Right on.
Well, I'm gonna get some rest. I'm beat. Get a few minutes rest before I start studying.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I think you should have told him, Rerun.
I will, Dwayne. Raj, there's a dog in your bed.
I know that. Why?
Because Rerun's bed was too messy for him?
Dwayne, as my friend, would you do me a favor?
Oh, sure, Raj.
All right, go over to the door and open it.
Aye.
All right, step outside, close it.
Now what?
Go home.
But, Raj, I invited Dwayne to dinner tonight.
Hey, he'll be back. Now, Rerun, we have got to have a little talk.
Later, Raj, I promised Mr. Winters I'd walk his dog.
Hey, the dog can wait.
I hope so.
Rerun, this good neighbor policy of yours has got to stop. I don't want to share my apartment with turkeys and dogs and someone's junk in my closet.
Okay, Raj, I'll be more careful.
Thank you.
I'll get it.
Hi, my name is Earl Burnett Jr. My family just moved into the apartment upstairs.
Oh, nice to meet you, Earl. What can I do for you?
Rerun.
Raj.
We need to borrow a vacuum cleaner. My dad sent me because he says grown-ups will lend anything to a cute 9-year-old kid.
Rerun, get rid of him.
1 second, Earl. Raj, why can't he borrow the vacuum?
Because the vacuum is only the beginning.
What do you mean?
Rerun, what Raj is trying to say is, once you let us use the vacuum, next thing, we want to borrow everything in your house. Except your turkey.
Look,
Why didn't you get a puppy like everyone else? Good turkey. Good bird.
all right, but look, I'm gonna lend you the vacuum, but I want you to bring it back the second you're finished with it.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, Raj. I'll help you with the vacuum cleaner.
Rerun, is he always so grouchy?
No, man, not always.
Probably a bad diet and lack of exercise. Well, fix him a house salad and run him around the block a few times. So long.
See you later, man. You know, Raj, I think I'm gonna like that kid. Cool it!
Ooh, that chicken's lucky he ain't alive, because the way Rerun hit, he dropping 5. Oh. Take that. Take that. Take that. Take that. Take that. Take that.
Don't take that.
What are you doing?
I'm just following this recipe, Raj. It says to bruise 1 chicken.
Give me that. That's braise, not bruise.
Uh-oh. You should see what he did to the broccoli.
How do you do?
Hi.
I'm Earl Barnett Sr. My son, Earl Barnett Jr., borrowed your vacuum cleaner.
Oh, right. How you doing? Roger Thomas.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Nice meeting you. This is my friend Dwayne.
Hello.
How you doing?
And that's my roommate, Rerun.
Oh, hi.
Rerun, that's a nickname, right?
Right, but my real name...
Do not need it. Do not need it. Besides, a nickname tells you so much more about a person. It's better than a real name. For instance, Rerun tells me about you.
Yeah, what?
Nothing much. I have to work on a better name for you there, Cherry Top.
Do you have a nickname?
Sure do. They call me Big Earl, and my son is Little Earl. How about you, Slim?
Raj.
Perfect, perfect. How about you, Junior? Got a nickname? I love it. Hey, thanks for the use of the vacuum.
Oh, hey, you're welcome. I'll just take this with
Yeah,
me.
I think you better have it checked out. You might have a bad switch there. That's a shame. They don't make anything the way they used to, you know?
Okay, well, I'm just gonna... Thank you very much. I'll just take it...
No. Now, when I borrow something from a neighbor, I like to put it back right where I found it.
Okay.
Where's it go, Headlamps?
Look, I don't... if you don't mind, I'll just take care of this now. I don't mean to be rude, but I got a lot of studying to do.
I understand, and thank you.
Okay.
See you later there, short stack. Take it easy.
Hey, just drop by anytime, neighbor, okay?
Rerun! What's this?
This is very interesting. Cameras, tape recorders. You, fellas doing your Christmas shopping early this year?
Hey, Rob, that's a great idea, man. I said I'm gonna do my Christmas shopping early, too.
Dwayne.
See, because if you wait till the last moment, man, all the stores are crowded, people pushing and shoving you. But I do love the Christmas carols. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy... Some Christmas spirit.
I thought you said there was silverware in that box.
That's what Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence told me.
Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence. The sticker on the back here says Tony's Camera Supply.
No. That stuff belongs to our neighbors.
All right, and they're away, and you're just watching it for them.
Right. Do you know the Lawrences?
No, I know the story.
Hey, wait, you're not accusing us of...
I'm not accusing anyone. Just relax, Capone.
Mr.
Son,
Barnett,
if I could use your phone, maybe I could clear this up, huh?
Mr. Barnett, with all due respect, this really isn't any of your business. The phone is right over here, Detective Barnett.
Thank you, speed reader.
Raj? Detective? We got a cop living in the building. There goes the neighborhood.
Oh, Blondie. Big Earl. Listen, let me talk to Tiny up in R&I, will you? Tiny. Big. Tony's Camera Supply. You got anything on a recent burglary?
Burglary?
Burglary!
Burglary.
Isn't that funny? He thinks that stuff is stolen and you and I did.
Oh, yeah? Funniest thing I heard in my life. Yeah.
Tony's Camera Supply was knocked over, and they ripped off some cameras and tape recorders.
I'm going home now.
Hold it. I think we all better go down to the station.
The station? Wait a minute. Not only are we innocent, but I do know my rights. How about no search warrant?
How about stolen property all in this box? How about all this evidence here?
Detective Barnett, we are innocent and we're not going anywhere.
That's right.
All right?
Now.
Nothing is gonna make us go through that door.
Hey.
All right? Our shoes are nailed to the floor.
Fellas, I have a service revolver, I have handcuffs, and I have the phone number of the SWAT team.
So we'll go barefoot.
Hey, why not?
In here. Right over there, fellas.
Hey, look, now, Detective Barnett, you're making a mistake. Now, Dwayne and I are students, and Rerun is a page at ABC.
Right.
I was a big brother.
And I have a paper route.
I was a Cub Scout.
And I was a Boy Scout.
I got straight A's in high school and was offered a scholarship to college.
And I never touched a girl on the first date.
Just park it right over there, will you, Larry, Moe, and Curly? Hey, shopping bag Mary, back again, huh?
Hi, Detective Barnett.
What is it this time? You and Charlie have another fight? Or did they catch you walking your dog without a leash?
I don't have no dog.
I know. They got you for stealing your neighbor's newspapers, right? Look, Mary, we got better things to do around here.
Yeah,
Why don't you go home
I gotta-
and try and behave
Yeah, I
yourself,
told the
okay?
cop
You're a
over there I
nice
was gonna-
lady.
Oh, yeah, but what about
I'll
the
tell the
captain?
captain that you and I go back a long way.
Oh,
Go on. Take
you're
a
a good guy.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay,
I
Mary, go
like
on,
you.
go on.
Hey, guys, good luck. Yeah.
Hey, Tex, what did you get it for? Pickpocketing. Mary! Mary!
Don't worry, guys. We're innocent. As soon as Mr. Barnett reaches our landlady, he'll know we're telling the truth.
Oh, guys, I got here just as soon as I could. What'd they get you for? Because I know you're innocent, but why did you do it? Huh?
Did you tell Mama?
Oh, no way, because it looks like you're in enough trouble already. Hey, but don't worry, Shirley is here. And you know I'm going to take care of you guys. So, what'd they get you for?
Burglary, breaking and entering, and receiving stolen property. You with them?
No, I never seen these guys for in my life.
Look, I did some checking. Your stories jive. You're clean. You are a page at ABC, and you two guys are students. Although Babyface here is flunking history. Homework.
Hey, that's it. Let's go. No hard feelings. We're free as a bird.
Hold it, Feathers. I also talked to your landlady. She never heard of anybody named Lawrence.
What?
And 4A, the apartment where you said they lived, hasn't been rented in 6 months.
That's impossible.
You guys got big trouble.
Hey, I want to talk to you. Come on over here. Come here. Right here. Come on.
You talking to me?
I'm not talking to the water cooler. Now, look, buddy, see, now, those guys are my friends, and I don't like the way you've been treating them.
Do you know who I am?
Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Did you hear him? Do you know who I am? No, that's not the question. The question is, do you know who I am? Now, I'm gonna give it to you straight. Now, I didn't want to, pull in a rank on you, but this little silly thing is going far enough. Now, you either let my friends go, or I'm going to speak about this to one of my personal friends, Mayor Tom Bradley.
You know Mayor Bradley?
Oh, sure. I mean, he came by Rob's place, and I fixed him a couple of cups of coffee, and we just sit and had a nice, long chat. We just like that.
Call Mayor Bradley.
Mayor Bradley! Mayor Tom Bradley! Hey, wait up, Mayor Tom Bradley!
Hello, Rod, Rerun. Hello? Anybody home? I'm coming. Nobody's home. What do you want?
I want to know why you opened the door to just anyone.
Is this going to be a lecture from a midget?
First of all, I'm not a midget, and second of all, you're old enough to know that you shouldn't open the door to strangers.
You know, I used to be obnoxious like you.
I know. I can tell. I'm Earl Barnett, Jr. My family just moved into the apartment upstairs. You aren't married to that cranky one with glasses, are you?
No, I'm his sister, Dee. You want to come in?
I am in. Supposing I was a crazy maniac killer on the loose.
I'd step on you and call a cop.
That's not hard to do. My father is a cop.
You got fuzz for a father?
Yeah. Dee, did you know that my dad took your brothers and his friends in for suspicion of burglary?
Suspicion of burglary? What are you talking about? You got the wrong people.
Is your brother named Raj? And his friends Rerun and
Yeah, but my brother never broke a law in his life.
Yeah, I figured this for a frame-up. See, some people named Lawrence got some silverware here, but it turned out to be stolen cameras and tape recorders. This is probably one of them.
No, this is my brother's. He uses it to study. He's had it for years.
Not this one. It's brand new. It still has a price tag on it. Look.
Earl, you're right. Sounds like my brother's in trouble. We gotta do something.
You know, you're a spunky little chick. I like you.
Thanks.
And I might add, for an older woman, you're very cute. I mean, you're no beauty. But for now...
Cute.
Yeah.
Listen, kid.
I love the way you call me kid. Just like Humphrey Bogart talked to Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca.
What are you talking about?
Oh, that was in the olden days. My dad said they were the best.
Kid.
Yeah, baby?
Earl, stop it. My brother is in trouble.
Ask who it is first.
Who is it?
Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, we've come for our silverware.
Just a minute.
It's them. It's them. What are we gonna do?
Calm down. Just calm down. Wait, I have an idea.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay.
Oh, hello. My, what darling children. And who are you?
I'm Roger's darling sister Dee, and this is my darling friend Earl.
We'll get our silverware and we'll be on our way.
It's not here.
Where is it?
Rerun had me put it in a safe place, so I'll go get it and I'll be right back. Amuse the kid.
So, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, how do you like living in the building?
Oh, we love it.
That's nice. That silverware must be very expensive for you to be so worried about it.
Well, it was a wedding gift.
Oh. Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom.
I don't like it, Helen. There's something fishy going on here.
Relax, Raymond. We've got something good going, so let's not lose our heads. As soon as that kid gets back, we'll just grab the stuff and fence it.
You're right. I know where we could get a good price for those cameras.
That must be the kid now.
We already gave.
Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, I'm Detective Earl Barnett.
Nice to meet you, officer. We were just leaving. Our daughter is getting married in Brazil.
Sit down, Jose. I think we want to have a little talk about some stolen merchandise.
Look, officer, there must be some mistake here. I mean, the only reason we're here is because we found these two lost children wandering around the streets and we brought them back home.
Dee, how could you get lost? You've lived in this neighborhood all your life.
Dwayne.
Well, we'll just be running along now.
No, wait a minute. You're the ones who asked me to keep stolen property.
Look, officer, you have no evidence. There's nothing to hold us on. It's our word against theirs.
I'm sorry, kids. I have to let him go. I can't hold him.
Now, if you'll just excuse us.
Wait, Papa. Dee and I hid this tape recorder under the pillow.
Hold it.
I recorded them saying they had a good thing going and they're going to fence the stuff and get a good price for those cameras.
You see? It's all your fault, Big Mouth.
Oh, yeah? You're the one who wanted to pull one last job.
Oh, yeah? It was your idea to leave the stuff here with them.
Okay, let's go. Good job, little Earl. See you later, fun face. Cherry top. Nice work there,
D. Sherlock.
You got it.
Hey, you two, that was all right. I mean, you got him to admit everything into the tape recorder. I mean, you two are pretty smart.
Wasn't me, it was my lady. She's smarter than you think.
What?
There was no tape in the tape recorder.
Isn't she something?
Well, Raj, isn't there something you have to say to little Earl?
Yeah, little Earl, I must admit, you're a good little neighbor. Thank you, pal. And thank you, sis.
Please, Roger. Dee and I don't need thanks. A man and his dame do what they got to do. And that's thanks enough for me.
For me, $1 should cover it.
Now that you mention it, I could use some hard cash.
All right.
Wow, I'm having nightmares about Big Earl busting us last night.
Is that why you kept rolling over and frisking yourself? Hey, you better learn your lesson, Rerun. No more fish feeding, no more dog walking, and most of all, nobody leaves anything in this apartment.
No problem, Raj. No more Mr. Nice Guy. How's it going?
How you doing, Roundhouse? Say, fellas, I have to go across town on police business. Could you mugs watch Little Earl for me?
Gee, I wish we could,
Sure
but...
thing, Detective Barnett.
Well, thank you, Focal Face. I'll be back in a little bit. Now, you behave yourself, Earl.
Bye, Dad.
Bye-bye.
Come here. What can I get you, Earl?
How about a 1 root beer and put a head on it?
Right on.
Hey, little Earl, since I have a little time for my studying, how about a game of backgammon?
Sure, but first, how about your sister's phone number? That chick drives me wild. Tell me, what does she like? Big cars,
Earl.
jewelry,
Earl.
furs,
Earl.
M&Ms.
Earl, let's play backgammon.
There you go, Earl.
Thank you, Magic Mountain.
Anyone here want dessert?
Nope, pass.
Maybe I'll have a small piece of cake.
Hey, sorry, the pastry truck broke down this morning. All we got is ice cream.
Wow, I was really in the mood for cake. Nothing for me, thanks.
Okay, 1-0 coming up.
Hey, why don't you just order some ice cream?
Because that's what I had for breakfast.
Look, I didn't finish these cookies I brought in this morning with me. You're welcome to them.
Thank you, baby.
Cookies. Hey, why don't you guys try these?
Rerun. Here you go, Dwayne.
Thanks.
How'd it taste, huh?
Oh.
Where did you buy these?
Buy them. I baked them myself. Yes, an old recipe my aunt gave me.
I didn't know you baked.
You know, there's a lot of things you don't know about me, Raj. Like, I bake and I sew and I do a little painting, you know. I play a mean game of handball. Yeah, I'm what you might call today's woman.
Well, Shirley, how would you like to be tomorrow's woman, too, and bake some more of these cookies? They are great.
Hey, you guys aren't putting me on, are you?
No, Shirley, these cookies are terrific.
Shirley, Shirley, these cookies are great, though.
Hey, you guys really mean it?
Yeah, we really mean it.
You know what?
Huh?
You ought to get Rob to sell them here.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'd buy them.
You would?
Yeah, I would. The whole world would buy 'em.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Let me sleep on it, you know.
Shirley, you could be a millionaire.
Good morning. Whoa.
Well, that's it, gang. No more cookies today, Snake. Hey, but I got my own homemade in the bag, huh?
Shoot, I guess I better get here earlier next time.
Hey, kid, step into my office.
Huh?
Look here, kid, you want to buy a watch?
A watch?
Yeah, a watch. Check it out. It's got a soulful Swiss movement, anti-magnetic, rust-resistant, waterproof, shock-proof, theft-proof, 21 jewels. Only 42 bucks. That's only $2 a jewel.
No thanks. I already got a watch.
Yeah, well, that's nice, but if that one happens to break on you while you're boiling an egg or something, you could be in real trouble. Check that one out. Look at it real good.
Hey, that's funny. There's no 3 on it.
Sure it is. There it is. Just fell down in the corner there. Check it around a little bit. Try it out. Just have fun. Keep your views for hours.
No thanks. Not for me.
Hey, kid. All those people lined up at the counter over there. What was that all about?
Oh, that was for the cookies.
Cookies? You mean all those people were standing in line just for cookies?
Oh, they're not just cookies. Those are Shirley Wilson's cookies. Man, they're the best.
That good, huh?
Good? I bet if Shirley put those out in stores and markets, she'd make $1 million.
Very interesting.
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, kid. You're excused.
Hey, I see you around.
Yeah, you take it slow.
All right.
Okay, guys, here you go. 3 cherry sodas and hold the pits.
About time. Hey, Shirley, you know it's great the way everyone's been flipping over your cookies.
Yeah, how much money have you made so far, Shirley?
Dwayne, don't you know it's not polite to ask people how much they make? Shirley, how much have you made?
$90.
$90?
Yeah.
$90? $90? You know how much that is?
Yeah, it's 2 $45 bills.
What are you gonna do with all your money, Shirley?
Well, I'm gonna pay off my stereo, and then I'm gonna send the rest to my aunt in Alabama. You know, after all, it's her recipe.
Hey, wait 1 minute, Shirley. Look here. If I hadn't ordered dessert that day,
Yeah.
you and Rob wouldn't be making all this money.
That's
you know?
true. Mm-hmm.
So, where do I come in?
I don't know, but see the door?
Yeah.
That's where you go out. Who you think been doing all the work?
You?
Good guess, yes. See, when I leave here every night, I'm so exhausted. But can I go home and get rest? No. I gotta start baking those cookies. Now, before I start baking, you know what I gotta do? I got to set up the equipment.
Set up equipment.
I got to crack the eggs.
Crack the eggs.
Then you got to beat the eggs.
Oh, yeah, beat them, baby.
Then I got to mix the dough.
Mix the dough.
And then chop up the nuts.
Chop up the nuts.
Then I got to put a little sugar, just a little bit of sugar in it. Then I got to melt the chocolate.
Melted chocolate. Wow, Shirley, can I come over and lick the bowl?
Won't do you any good, Rerun. I had baked my last batch of cookies for a long while.
Wow.
What?
I said, won't do you any good.
I heard you. You can't stop. You ruined D. Thomas Enterprises.
D. Thomas what?
Well, you see, Dee buys the cookies here for 25 cents. And then she goes to the school cafeteria and sells them for 30 cents.
And I get 40 cents on days when they serve liver.
Well, look here, D. I'm sorry to break up your franchise, but I'm not baking no more cookies.
Not baking any more cookies. Shirley, that's crazy. Just when things were going good.
Look, I'll tell you what's going.
What's going, baby?
My health.
Your health?
Mm-hmm. My free time.
Oh, that's bad.
My love life.
Ooh, that's worse.
As a matter of fact, the only thing that gets turned on in my house is the oven. Time for a change.
Excuse me, are you Shirley Wilson?
No, she is. Look here.
Miss Wilson.
What do you want?
Miss Wilson, I'm Marty Slade from Marty Slade Enterprises.
Yes.
Zap. Now, When you want your fortune made, don't depend on luck. Put your trust in Marty Slade. Make yourself a buck.
Hey, that's all here. Look, he got all that on that small card. What can I do for you?
Well, you see, I'm a promoter, and I'm here to promote you. Now, I've heard all about your fabulous cookies, and I can turn those cookies into a fortune.
Yeah.
Wow, fortune cookie.
To my office. Shirley, I can call you Shirley.
I think so. Your mouth seems to be in working order.
Well, Shirley, I just drove over here, and I've got wind of your cookies.
Hey, don't blame me. Roll up your windows.
Yeah, well, Shirley, everybody is talking about your cookies.
So, what's the point, Mr. Say?
My point is, I want to promote your cookies. Now, the way I got it figured, you are the biggest thing to happen to the cookie industry since cream centers.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now, Shirley, the first thing I do is I order attractive bags for your cookies.
Yes.
Then I set deals with local stores to carry your cookies.
My cookies.
Finally, I set the promotion for your cookies.
My cookies.
Shirley, I am going to convince everyone in this whole town, and I mean everyone, that there is nothing they can put in their mouth that tastes as good as
Your cookie.
Well, now, you know, that's fine, Mr. Slade, except for one thing. I'm no longer baking my cookies.
What? Shirley, do you have any idea how many cookies are sold in the country each year?
No.
Exactly. With inflation being what it is today, people just can't afford luxury items anymore. That's why so many Americans are rediscovering cookies. And Shirley, whose cookies should they be rediscovering?
Your cookies.
Shirley, I'm not talking about 50 or 100 bucks.
No.
I'm talking about citywide distribution.
Okay.
I'm talking about large-scale production. I'm talking about major money.
He's talking about 100 miles an hour. I don't trust anybody who can talk without breathing.
Who is this child? Can we make her disappear?
Sure, $5 get the trick done.
Hey, be quiet, D. Shirley, listen to what he's saying. You could be rich and famous.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that how well-known Jones got started?
Right on it. Now, this is a bright young brother right here, and you should listen to him, Shirley. Now, Shirley, Jones got started baking cookies in his home.
Yeah.
And now, those very same cookies
Yes.
are in every major department store in the United States. And he was bought out by a giant corporation for $2 million.
$2 million? $2 million?
$2 million.
Shirley, you better pay attention to this man.
That's a smart young sister right there. Shirley.
Huh?
Now, when we distribute you cookies throughout Southern California,
Yeah.
3 big companies will come in with the bidding.
Okay.
The first company will open with a $500,000 bid.
Ooh, $500,000.
And the second company will come in with
$1 million.
and the third company will up that.
$1.5 million.
Right.
$2 million.
Right.
$2.5 million.
Right.
That's too high for me.
It's mine.
Wayne, at least at my age.
Shirley, step into my office.
Okay.
No, Shirley,
Oh, I thought that was your office.
I moved.
Good luck.
What do you say, Shirley? Are we in business?
I got to think about it.
$50 advance.
I thought about it. Partner. Hey, Rob, thanks, Lorel. Hey, but didn't I see you buy a bag before?
Yeah, but I bumped into a big spender on the way home and made myself a $50.
Oh, you're selling my cookies for profit, huh?
No, I sold your cookies for what I paid for them. I got 50 cents for your autograph. No kidding. There's a big business in famous signatures, you know.
Really?
Really? Washington's is about $500. Lincoln's the same.
But you only got 50 cents for mine?
Don't feel bad, Shirley. I thought.
Hi, Shirley.
Oh, hi, Dee.
Little Earl, your father sent me for you.
I gotta go, Shirley. I do whatever she tells me. The kid knocks me out.
Well, get on down there.
Bye, Shirley.
Bye, y'all. The kid knocks me out.
Could you make it to Sylvester?
Oh, yeah, sure. To Sylvester. Okay.
Pagliara.
What?
Pagliara.
Pagliara.
Yeah, it's a P-A-G.
Wait a minute. Where you get the G?
There's a G in Pagliara.
What?
It's silent.
Well, then don't say it.
Okay, with love...
Man, if you don't get those cookies out of here...
Shirley.
Oh, man. I don't know how Alex hated autograph all those books.
Shirley, there's your salary.
Oh, wait a minute, Slade. Oh, wait a minute. Now, this must be a joke. I know. $30? I mean, $30 for all those cookies we sold?
Shirley, there's overhead. Look, Shirley, production costs money, ingredients cost money, bags cost money.
Listen here. And your new teeth gonna cost money. Now, either you share some of those profits with me, or you find someone else to promote.
Well, now, Miss Wilson, if you're quite through,
I guess I am.
I have a little contract here, which you signed, that calls for you to deliver to me a certain amount of cookies every week. There is nothing in this contract about sharing the profits. It'll stand up in any court of law. Now, Shirley, I want those cookies.
Huh? Roger, how about this, huh? Oh, yeah. I'm afraid you're right, Roger. This looks like an ironclad contract to me.
Well, I couldn't find a loophole anywhere.
I didn't understand all those heretofores and wheretofores. What do they mean?
Well, I'm no lawyer, Dwayne, but I think they mean that Shirley's got a real problem.
Hey, let's say we get Slade and we slam him up against the wall and we throw a couple lefts and rights and uppercuts, and then when he crumbles to the floor, y'all can call me at home. I'll come right over.
Dwayne.
Huh?
When you talk, try not to do it out loud.
Shirley, how'd you get yourself into this mess?
Greed. Sounds so good, you know, fast and big money.
Yeah, we weren't much help either. You know, we all got kind of carried away.
Yeah, I heard about that Wall Street bidding session.
Yeah, well, I guess I did some of that $1 million bidding, too. You know, Shirley, we're very, very sorry. Right, Dwayne?
Oh, yeah, right.
Hey, it's nobody's fault but mine. I'm old enough to know better.
Yeah, you are old.
Hey, you...
Detective Barnett, think of something. You're a policeman. You must know how to get around the law.
The law is not something to get around. The law is the law. It's what this country's all about. Laws are made to punish the guilty, protect the innocent, and guarantee equal rights to all citizens. However, there's always a way. There's always an answer, right? There's always one smart person in every crowd to come up with a solution. Roger?
What?
What's the solution?
Come on, let's all sit around the table. I'm sure we'll think of something.
Okay,
Then. Let's
now
put our
let-
heads together.
We start at the top.
All right.
Oh, all right, Shirley. Shirley?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Excuse me.
Yeah, can I help you?
No, but perhaps I can help you. My calling card? I'm Cal Cook. My partner is Ken Crocker. You've heard of Cook and Crocker, of course.
Well, I don't know.
Well, we're a huge bakery out of Keokuk. Cook and Crocker, crackers and cookies. We're big, very big.
Very big?
Huge. As a matter of fact, we may expand, go into cakes for kicks. What do you think?
I don't know.
You see, we at Cook and Crocker feel if we can cook quality cakes quickly and keep cooking our cookies and crackers, then Cook and Crocker can qualify as quality cookie, cake, and cracker cookers.
My man, that was a mouthful. Now, what is it that you really want?
Oh, I'm just waiting for my partner. He's our chief researcher. He's presently looking over our balance sheet in preparation to make you an offer to buy out your cookie line.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. See, we at Cook and Crocker feel that if we can capture your cookies and keep cooking our cookies, crackers, and quick quality cakes, it could be quite a coup.
Hey, Shirley,
Yeah?
did you hear that? He said that if they could capture our cookies in addition to their cookies, crackers, and quick quality cakes, it would be quite a coup.
Conclusively.
Huh? Yeah. Well, where's that partner of yours?
Oh, Ken? Ken, can you come in, Ken?
Coming. Ken here, you call, Cal? Ken Crocker, Cook and Crocker, cookies and crackers.
Yes, well, step into my office.
Gladly. You see, Mr. Slade, we at Cook and Crocker have decided to take on a quality line of chocolate chip cookies.
Hey, man. Hey, you guys think you talking to a kid or something? This is Marty Slade you talking to here. I got something good going on, and I know it. So y'all just get right on down to the bottom line. How much?
You deliver to us 3 million cookies a year, and we will deliver to you $500,000. Think it over. Take your time.
Right, I'll take it.
Oh, wait a minute. What do you mean you take it? What is you take it? Don't I have something to say about this?
No.
What do you mean no?
Step into my office.
Step in nothing. What do you mean no?
Now, look here. I got a signed contract with your signature on it. I have all rights. I make all decisions.
Now, is that true? Because we have to know who the responsible party is.
Oh, yeah. I am the responsible party. This is my company. I am the boss, sole owner. I'm the... Chief Chip.
Chief Chip, I like that.
Yes, that's good to know. Now the only thing we're waiting for is the report from the Board of Health.
What you mean?
It's a mere formality. The health department is at your apartment right now, Miss Wilson, checking out your kitchen.
See, if they find no violations, we will write you a check. However, if they do find violations, that would put the entire matter in a different light.
What kind of light?
A dim one, I'm afraid. You see, since you assume all responsibility, you're liable for all claims.
Claims? Come here for a minute, brother. What claims?
Well, all purchasers of Shirley's cookies will be entitled to damages, and I imagine that will come to quite a tidy sum.
What are you talking about?
And the fine will be substantial, too. The health department tends to be very severe in these matters.
Wait a minute, you trying to tell me that I'm gonna get zapped with a fine and damages cause she got a dirty kitchen?
Well, you just said you're responsible for the entire company. Are there any health violations, Miss Wilson?
No, none at all. None that I could be blamed for, because Lord knows I've complained often enough to the landlord about those flies.
Flies?
Flies?
Yeah, but they're very healthy. See, they just go from cookie to cookie, just getting healthy.
Sounds like bad news to me, Slade.
Now, wait a minute
It's
here.
gonna cost you a lot of money, Mr. Slade, I'm afraid. But you're lucky in one respect. They hardly ever send anyone to jail unless they've had a previous record.
Yes, and of course that wouldn't count in this case. Would it?
Wait a minute. Just wait a minute now. I am not gonna be responsible for her flies.
My flies? I've had about enough of you fast mouth. Now, wait a minute now. Why is it when we're talking about profit, it's your profit? When we're talking about flies, it's my flies. Why is that? And take a look at this. Let me show this contract. You see that part right there? What? Right there. Look right there. Read that. What that say? No, let me show it to you. It says, you are responsible. Okay? Now look down here on this page here. What that say? You are going to jail. You know why? Mr. Slade, you own a cookie company.
Oh, no, you don't. You ain't sticking me with this. Now, y'all check this out. This is your contract. There it is. That's your contract. There's your contract, Miss Cookie Maker. Those are your cookies, your kitchen, your flies. I have nothing further to do with it.
Well, I
Mr. Slade, now we may need your testimony, so now how may I reach you?
Try the yellow pages. Let your fingers do the walking. I'm gone.
But Mr. Slade,
don't know. I ain't doing business with you. Hey! Yes! Come here, you. Oh, you were great, guys. I love you for it. Thank you.
Would you like another cookie, little Earl?
Well, 3 is usually my limit, but as long as I'm not driving.
Well, you know, I really got to give it to you, Raj. You and Big Earl really taught that Slick Slade a lesson.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, but you know, it's too bad he was a phony, because things could have really worked out good for Shirley.
I get it.
All right.
Hey, how's it going,
Hey,
Slade?
it's all right. What's happening, man? Hey. I was over at the soda shop, and Shirley asked me to drop these off to you guys.
More cookies? Well, she just gave us each a big bag this morning.
But she really appreciates all the help you guys gave her with Slade. Man, he was really a rat.
Oh, wait a minute, he wasn't all bad.
What? Huh? Dwayne, what are you talking about? Slade was bad news.
Oh, he was nice to me.
When was he ever nice to you?
About an hour ago.
About an hour ago?
Yeah, see, I bumped into him in the streets, and he must have felt really bad and said he wanted to make up for things. So he sold me this watch for $4.
Ah, that's the one with the 3 off of it.
Yeah, but see, if you shake it around, you can get it right back up there. I'm getting good at it.
Well, let me try. Tap it in the back.
As long as you be careful.
All right, shake it around.
Yeah, shake it around, tap it. Come on.
Begins in the late afternoon glare of Los Angeles, when the city seems honest only because it is too tired to pretend otherwise, and Dwayne Wayne understood that feeling better than most as he sat behind the steering wheel of a borrowed sedan that smelled faintly of fast food and old ambitions, watching the courthouse steps empty out while he waited for a man who didn't know he was being followed, a man whose life looked clean on paper but felt wrong in the way certain smiles linger a second too long, and Dwayne, once a hopeful engineer with too many ideas and not enough patience, had reinvented himself not out of heroism but necessity, learning that observation paid better than invention when the world had already decided how much room it would give you. He had started calling himself a detective as a joke at first, something to tell women at parties when the truth felt too thin, but jokes have a way of hardening into habits, and habits into professions, especially when you are good at noticing what other people ignore, like the way the man exiting the courthouse adjusted his tie twice before looking around, or how his phone stayed in his pocket as if he didn't trust it, or how he smiled at a woman he didn't know with an intimacy that belonged somewhere else, and Dwayne felt that familiar itch in his chest, the one that told him this was another creep worth understanding, not because he wanted to expose him publicly, not yet, but because the act of knowing had become its own form of control. The man walked past the bronze plaque listing donors, past the cluster of lawyers who laughed too loudly, and into a black sedan that pulled away with a smoothness that suggested money and practice, and Dwayne followed at a careful distance, reminding himself of the rules he had made after the first time he went too far, the first time he knocked on a door that should have stayed closed, the first time he learned that people who look ordinary can react in extraordinary ways when they feel seen. Traffic thickened as the sun dipped, and the radio, stuck on an old R&B station, played a song that reminded him of college nights with Ron and Freddie, when what's happening now was just a phrase they used to joke about the future, not a question he asked himself every morning, and he wondered briefly how he had become the guy who chased shadows instead of building bridges, but the question dissolved as the black sedan turned into a parking structure near an office building that looked respectable enough to hide anything, and Dwayne parked across the street, pulled on a baseball cap, and walked with the practiced looseness of someone who belonged nowhere in particular. Inside the building, the lobby smelled of lemon cleaner and ambition, and the security guard barely looked up as Dwayne followed the man into an elevator, counting floors by feel, watching reflections instead of faces, noticing how the man's shoulders relaxed only when the doors closed, as if public air made him nervous, and when they exited on the 7th floor, the hallway was quiet in the way that suggested after-hours arrangements, offices with lights on but doors shut, and Dwayne pretended to check his phone as the man unlocked an office with a keycard that bore a different name, which told Dwayne more than any confession could. because people who carry multiple identities rarely do it for harmless reasons. He waited until the man disappeared inside, then slipped a listening device beneath a fake fire alarm panel he had already loosened weeks earlier on a hunch that now felt justified, and as he worked, his thoughts drifted to Freddie, who would have told him this was too much, that some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed, while Ron would have laughed and asked what the payoff was, and Dwayne, honest enough to admit he didn't know anymore, finished the job and left without looking back, trusting the night to do what it always did, which was reveal and conceal. In equal measure, back in his car he replayed the audio feed, catching fragments of conversation, names spoken softly, arrangements hinted at rather than stated, and beneath it all a tone of entitlement that made his jaw tighten, because creeps, in his experience, weren't monsters but men who believed the rules bent naturally around them, and as he drove home through streets that shifted from polished to broken in the space of a mile, he wondered whether exposing such men changed anything or simply rearranged the furniture of power. But the question again had no time to settle, because his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that read, "I know what you're doing," followed by a second message, "We should talk," and Dwayne laughed once, sharp and humorless, because fear had always been part of the job, but being seen by the unseen was new, and it thrilled him in a way he didn't want to admit. At his apartment, a modest place decorated with half-finished projects and memories he hadn't thrown away. He poured a drink he didn't need and sat at his desk, pinning photos to a corkboard that had become a map of other people's secrets, each face a story he hadn't decided how to tell, and as the city hummed outside, he listened again to the recordings, catching the cadence of lies, the pauses where truth might slip, and he thought about the title he'd given himself in his head, The Creep Detective, half ironic, half aspirational, because detecting creeps wasn't about justice in the grand sense but about clarity, about refusing to let discomfort be dismissed as paranoia, and somewhere between the third replay and the fourth drink, his phone buzzed again, this time with an address and a time, and the simple sentence, "Come alone," which made him smile despite himself, because whoever was reaching out had underestimated him already, assuming alone meant unprepared, and as he lay back on his couch, staring at the ceiling fan that ticked like a slow clock, he wondered how many versions of himself this path would require, how many masks he would wear, before he forgot which one was his, and he decided, not for the first time, that tomorrow he would either quit or double down, knowing full well that people like him rarely quit, because curiosity, once sharpened by danger, becomes a need, and needs don't negotiate. The night stretched, the city breathed, and Dwayne drifted into a shallow sleep filled with faces that smiled too easily, already stepping toward a meeting that would redraw the quiet boundaries of his life. And if you were to ask him then what was happening now, he might have told you the truth at last, that the world was exactly as strange as it had always been, only he was finally paying attention, and that attention once awakened demanded to be fed. Unfolds the next morning with a gray patience that felt almost judgmental, the kind of light that made everything visible without making anything kind. And Dwayne Wayne woke before his alarm because his body had already decided that rest was a luxury he could no longer afford. His phone still warm beside him as if it had been thinking while he slept. The address from the anonymous message burned into his memory like a bad lyric you couldn't forget. And as he showered he replayed the night before, the sound of that man's voice through cheap speakers, the confidence wrapped around secrecy, the sense that the city itself had leaned in to listen. And he dressed not like a detective or a target but like a man who might disappear into a crowd without causing a ripple, jeans that had seen better intentions, a jacket with pockets that knew his habits, and a calm he practiced the way other people practiced faith. The cafe on the corner was louder than it needed to be, a deliberate noise to drown out private thoughts, and Dwayne sat with his coffee cooling untouched as he watched reflections in the window instead of faces, noticing patterns rather than people, a woman who stirred her drink too long, a man who checked the door every 30 seconds, and he wondered, not for the first time, how many creeps walked freely because no one bothered to name what made them uncomfortable, how many stories stayed locked inside polite silence, and the thought steadied him more than caffeine ever could. The address led him downtown to an old hotel that had survived by reinventing itself just often enough to stay useful, its lobby dressed in nostalgia and neglect, and Dwayne entered without hesitation, trusting that hesitation was the most obvious tell of all, the front desk clerk barely glancing up as he passed, already late for something that mattered more than a stranger's intentions, and the elevator ride felt longer than physics allowed, each floor lighting up like a warning. until he reached the 8th, where the carpet muffled sound in the air carried the faint perfume of secrets rehearsed too many times. The room number was at the end of the hall, a deliberate choice, and Dwayne knocked once firmly, because anything less suggested fear and anything more suggested anger. And when the door opened, it revealed not the shadowy threat he had imagined, but a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes sharpened by purpose, her posture controlled but not defensive, and she stepped aside without a word, letting him enter a room stripped of personal detail, as if whoever stayed there didn't plan on being remembered. She introduced herself as Lisa Grant only after the door closed, her voice even, practiced in the way of someone who had learned that emotion invited dismissal, and she told him she had been watching him for weeks, not because she enjoyed it but because she recognized the pattern of someone hunting patterns, and Dwayne felt a flicker of irritation. He quickly buried, because this was the risk he accepted every time he followed someone else, the possibility of becoming the subject instead of the observer. Lisa explained that she worked in compliance for a firm that specialized in cleaning up reputations, not legally but narratively, smoothing rough edges until the truth became unrecognizable, and she had noticed Dwayne's work because it created problems her clients couldn't easily erase, the kind of quiet documentation that didn't accuse outright but made denial exhausting, and she wasn't there to threaten him, she said, but to offer context, because the man he was following was part of a network that treated exposure like a temporary inconvenience, paying settlements, issuing apologies, and returning to business as usual with only slightly adjusted tactics. As she spoke, Dwayne realized the room wasn't neutral at all but carefully chosen to feel that way, a stage designed to remove distractions, and he asked the only question that mattered: why her, why now? And Lisa smiled without warmth, telling him that she was tired of being the last stop before silence, tired of watching stories get buried under non-disclosure agreements, tired of convincing herself that this was how the system worked, and when she had traced the listening device back to him, she saw not a rival but an opportunity, someone reckless enough to keep records without permission, someone who didn't need a paycheck to stay interested. They talked for hours without raising their voices, exchanging fragments of information like people trading contraband, and Dwayne learned that the courthouse man was only one spoke in a wheel that extended into media, politics, and philanthropy, men who donated to the right causes while treating people as disposable backstage. And Lisa learned that Dwayne wasn't motivated by revenge or ideology but by a stubborn refusal to accept that discomfort should be ignored just because it was inconvenient. When he left the hotel, the city felt different. Not because it had changed but because the scale had shifted, the problem now larger than any single creep, and as he walked, his phone buzzed again, this time with a photo attached, a grainy image of him entering the building, taken from across the street, accompanied by the message, "Careful who you trust," which made him laugh softly because trust had never been his currency, but caution, he knew, was about to become essential. He met Ron that evening at a bar they used to frequent when their biggest concern was whether life would ever start, and Ron listened with the half-smile of a man who loved stories but feared consequences, telling Dwayne that this sounded less like detective work and more like a war of attrition, one where the side with more patience usually lost, and Dwayne countered that patience was overrated when silence did most of the damage, and Freddie, joining them late, shook his head and said this was how people disappeared, not dramatically but quietly, socially, professionally, until they were reduced to cautionary tales told over drinks. Dwayne drove home alone, the conversation replaying like static, and he reviewed Lisa's files, each document a reminder that systems protected themselves with elegance, not force, and he understood then that being the creep detective meant more than following men into parking structures. It meant deciding how much of himself he was willing to risk to keep telling stories that powerful people preferred untold. Near midnight, he received an encrypted message from Lisa with a single line: "They're accelerating," which felt heavier than any threat, because acceleration meant panic, and panic led to mistakes, and mistakes led to exposure. And as Dwayne sat at his desk, pinning new photos to the board, drawing lines that no longer fit neatly, he realized he was standing at the edge of something irreversible, a moment where observation turned into participation, and he wondered whether the city would notice if he fell, or if it would simply absorb him, like it absorbed everything else. And as sleep finally claimed him, uneasy and incomplete, he accepted a truth he had been circling for years, that once you decide to look closely, you don't get to choose what looks back. Opens with rain that didn't cleanse anything, a thin persistent drizzle that only rearranged the dirt, and Dwayne Wayne watched it beat along his apartment window as if the city were trying to rewrite itself one drop at a time. His sleep fractured into shallow pieces by half-dreams of hallways without doors and voices speaking just out of range, and when he finally rose, the weight in his chest felt less like fear and more like responsibility, a distinction he had learned to make only recently. Because fear asked you to retreat while responsibility demanded motion. Lisa's message from the night before lingered in his mind, "They're accelerating," a phrase that suggested not urgency but inevitability, like gravity suddenly remembered its job, and as he dressed he reviewed what he knew, not in neat bullet points but in overlapping impressions, the courthouse man's guarded posture, the network Lisa hinted at without fully mapping, the anonymous warnings that felt less like intimidation and more like impatience, and he realized that someone out there wanted him either scared enough to stop or bold enough to make a mistake, and neither option appealed to him. He left his apartment without his usual listening gear, choosing instead the anonymity of emptiness, because sometimes the absence of preparation unsettled opponents more than visible readiness, and he walked several blocks before hailing a rideshare, giving an address he didn't intend to visit, then exiting early and doubling back on foot, letting instinct guide him through streets that shifted from gentrified optimism to exhausted survival in the space of a few intersections, the city's contradictions comforting in their consistency. His destination was a community legal clinic tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore, a place that advertised free consultations and quiet miracles, and inside, the air smelled of paper and old coffee. The receptionist's smile practiced but sincere, and Dwayne asked for a man named Harold Finch, knowing full well that names like that were either disguises or jokes, and when Harold appeared, older than Dwayne expected, his hair white but his eyes alert, the kind of alertness that comes from decades of listening rather than watching, Dwayne felt a cautious respect settle between them. Harold had once been a journalist, he explained as they sat in a cramped office lined with boxes instead of awards, back when journalism still pretended it could change things, and he now volunteered at the clinic because it allowed him to hear stories before they were edited by fear or legal counsel. And Dwayne explained his work not as detective business but as pattern recognition, a hobby that had outgrown its innocence, and Harold nodded as if he had been waiting for someone like him, someone without institutional allegiance, someone who hadn't yet learned the many ways the truth could be discouraged. They spoke for hours, not trading secrets so much as calibrating trust, and Harold confirmed what Lisa had implied, that the network Dwayne was circling didn't rely on brute force but on exhaustion, dragging complainants through processes designed to wear them down, reframing harm as misunderstanding, persistence as obsession, and by the time anything reached public view it was so diluted that outrage felt embarrassing rather than righteous. Harold offered names without insisting, documents without interpretation, and Dwayne understood that this was how alliances formed in this world, quietly, without handshakes or promises, just an acknowledgement that silence had already failed too many times. Leaving the clinic, Dwayne noticed the same black sedan from days earlier idling across the street, its presence casual enough to suggest it wanted to be seen, and instead of confronting it or fleeing, he sat on the bookstore's concrete steps and made a call to Freddie, talking loudly about nothing in particular, about groceries and an old show they used to watch, performing normalcy as if it were armor. And when the sedan finally pulled away, he felt a flicker of satisfaction quickly tempered by realism, because intimidation was a language, and he had just replied in kind. That evening, Lisa sent him access to a secure server, a repository of sanitized complaints and internal memos that read like confessions written by lawyers, and as Dwayne scrolled through them, he felt his perception shift again. The creeps no longer isolated figures but nodes in a system that rewarded discretion over decency, and he wondered whether naming individuals mattered as much as exposing mechanisms, whether the creep detective was chasing faces when he should have been mapping structures. He met Lisa later that night in a diner that stayed open by pretending it was still 1987, vinyl booths cracked with use, coffee refilled without questions, and she looked more tired than before, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't touch. And she told him they had noticed her access logs, that questions were being asked politely but insistently, and Dwayne saw then that her acceleration warning wasn't abstract but personal, a countdown disguised as routine, and he offered her a choice he wasn't sure he had the right to offer, to step back, to let him take the risk, and she smiled sadly, telling him that stepping back was how she had survived for years and how others hadn't, and that this time she intended to stay visible. Outside the diner, the rain returned, heavier now. And as they parted, Dwayne felt the strange intimacy of shared Danger, not romantic but purposeful, two people aligned not by trust but by refusal. And driving home he considered the ethics of what he was doing, the line between exposure and exploitation, the possibility that his documentation could re-traumatize those it aimed to protect, and he resolved to move slower even as pressure mounted, to let the story breathe rather than forcing it into shape. Near midnight, his phone rang from a blocked number, and the voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly, congratulating him on his curiosity and suggesting that curiosity, while admirable, often led to isolation, and Dwayne listened without interrupting, letting the man reveal himself through tone rather than words, the entitlement unmistakable. And when the call ended without threats or demands, Dwayne understood that this was the opening move of a negotiation he hadn't agreed to join. He spent the night reorganizing his board, removing faces and replacing them with arrows, flows of influence rather than portraits of guilt, and as dawn approached, he felt a clarity settle in, the kind that arrives not with answers but with direction, and he knew that part 3 of his life as the creep detective ended here, at the point where observation became strategy, where reacting gave way to anticipating, and as the city woke again indifferent and alive, Dwayne allowed himself one quiet moment of doubt before stepping forward anyway, because doubt, he had learned, was not a weakness but a compass, and the fact that he still felt it meant he hadn't yet become the thing he was chasing. Begins with a morning that felt staged, sunlight arranged too neatly across the city as if someone wanted to convince Dwayne Wayne that order still existed, and he mistrusted it immediately, because neatness had become a signal rather than a comfort, a sign that something messy was being hidden just out of view, and as he moved through his apartment, the routine of coffee and keys and checking the locks felt less like habit and more like rehearsal, every motion practiced against the possibility of interruption. He had decided the night before that if the network he was tracing thrived on exhaustion and delay, then speed, measured intentional speed, would be his counter, not the reckless kind that drew attention but the steady accumulation of undeniable context, and with that in mind he packed a small bag with nothing overtly incriminating, just a notebook, a voice recorder that looked older than it was, and a stack of printed emails that read harmless until you understood the gaps between sentences. His first stop was a co-working space near the river, one of those converted warehouses that sold creativity by the square foot, and he chose it because anonymity thrived where everyone pretended to be seen, and as he settled at a shared table, he opened his laptop and logged into Lisa's server, mapping connections with the patience of someone assembling a puzzle whose final image he refused to imagine too clearly, because clarity too early could harden into bias. Names repeated across different complaints, companies overlapped through shell boards, charitable foundations shared office addresses with lobbying firms, and Dwayne felt the familiar tightening behind his eyes, the sensation that came when curiosity tipped toward obsession, and he paused long enough to breathe, reminding himself that people were not diagrams and that harm did not become less real because it was organized. Mid-morning, a man sat across from him without asking, a casual violation that felt deliberate, and Dwayne clocked him instantly, the expensive watch worn without irony, the posture relaxed but alert, the way his gaze skimmed the room before settling, and when the man introduced himself as Evan, offering a smile that suggested access rather than friendliness, Dwayne recognized the opening gambit of influence, the attempt to define the interaction before it began. Evan spoke lightly about the space, about how communities formed and dissolved around shared interests, and Dwayne listened, responding just enough to keep the conversation alive without feeding it. And when Evan finally pivoted, mentioning that he admired independent thinkers who documented social patterns, Dwayne knew the meeting was no coincidence, that the network had decided to stop watching and start shaping. Evan suggested coffee, suggested collaboration, suggested that Dwayne's work could be elevated with the right backing, framed as an opportunity rather than a warning, and Dwayne declined. Politely, noting that independence was the point, and Evan's smile thinned almost imperceptibly, the mask slipping just enough to reveal irritation beneath, and as he stood to leave, he placed a business card on the table that bore no title, just a name and a number, and said, "We like to solve problems early," which Dwayne understood as both an offer and a threat. After Evan left, the co-working space felt louder, every laugh edged with implication, and Dwayne packed up, choosing motion over rumination because stillness invited doubt, and he spent the afternoon walking, letting the city recalibrate him, past murals that tried to compress history into slogans, past construction sites where foundations were dug without ceremony, and he thought about the card in his pocket, about how power often announced itself not with force but with convenience, offering to make things easier in exchange for silence. He met Harold Finch again at the clinic, this time with Lisa present, and the three of them sat in a small conference room that smelled faintly of bleach and hope, and Dwayne laid out what he knew, not dramatically but precisely, the way you presented facts when you wanted them to survive scrutiny, and Harold listened with the calm of someone who had watched institutions age into caricatures of themselves, while Lisa took notes she didn't need, anchoring herself in the familiar ritual of documentation. They discussed strategy without grand plans, agreeing that a single exposé would be swallowed whole but a series of small, verifiable releases could strain the system, forcing responses that revealed patterns, and Dwayne volunteered to be the visible edge, the one who published and spoke, because invisibility had already been tried by too many people and it had failed them. Leaving the clinic, he noticed a change, not in who followed him but in how, the surveillance less subtle now, less interested in avoiding detection, as if to say we are here, and he considered confronting it before deciding that acknowledgement was a form of consent he refused to grant. That night, he recorded a short audio piece, not accusatory but exploratory, describing the mechanics of reputation laundering without naming names, and he released it through channels he knew valued nuance over virality, and the response was modest but engaged, questions asked rather than conclusions drawn, which felt like success measured in the right currency. By morning, his inbox filled with messages from people who recognized the pattern, not from headlines but from lived experience, and Dwayne spent hours responding selectively, careful not to promise justice but clarity, careful not to re-traumatize by pushing for details, and in doing so he felt the role of the creep detective shift again, less hunter and more archivist, someone responsible for holding space where stories could exist without being flattened. The pushback arrived quietly, a hosting platform flagging his audio for review, a bank notification requesting additional verification, small frictions designed to sap momentum, and Dwayne documented each one, understanding that obstruction was itself evidence, and when Evan's number appeared on his phone later that day, Dwayne let it ring, choosing absence as his reply. He met Ron and Freddie that evening in a park instead of a bar, the open air making paranoia feel indulgent, and they talked about anything but the work until Ron finally asked the question he had been circling, whether Dwayne was ready to live with the consequences if this didn't end neatly. And Dwayne answered honestly that neat endings were a luxury he had stopped expecting, that the alternative, returning to comfortable ignorance, felt worse. As dusk settled, Dwayne received a message from Lisa containing a single scanned document, an internal memo that contradicted a public statement released earlier that day, and he felt the click of alignment, the sense that a seam had been found, and he prepared his next piece with care, contextualizing the memo without sensationalism, letting the contradiction speak for itself. The release landed with more force than he anticipated, not viral but persistent, picked up by niche outlets that fed larger ones, and within hours, a spokesperson issued a clarification that only deepened the inconsistency, and Dwayne watched the system strain, not collapse but wobble, revealing the effort required to maintain its posture. That night, he returned home to find his apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, the message clear enough to feel almost theatrical, and instead of calling the police, he photographed everything, filed a report later, and sat on his couch with the lights on, letting the fear crest and recede because fear, he had learned, was a wave you could drown in or ride depending on how you met it. As sleep finally came, shallow but real, he dreamed not of pursuers or threats but of maps without legends, lines intersecting without explanation, and when he woke, he felt resolved in a way that surprised him, the resolve of someone who had accepted that control was an illusion but direction was not, and that being the creep detective was less about catching anyone than about refusing to look away when the shape of harm became visible, even if it meant becoming visible too. Moves forward under a sky that felt undecided, clouds drifting without conviction as if mirroring Dwayne Wayne's own calculation of risk and momentum, and he woke to the faint hum of traffic below his apartment, the door incident from the night before still sharp in his mind, not as a violation of space but as a message written in absence, because nothing missing meant the intent was psychological rather than practical, a reminder that access was possible. And as he made coffee he catalogued his reactions with clinical honesty, noting the tremor in his hands that faded as routine took over, the way anger surfaced only after fear had exhausted itself, and he accepted that both were fuel if handled carefully. The story he had released continued to circulate in its quiet way, picked up by analysts who cared more about process than personalities, and Dwayne spent the morning responding to inquiries with a precision that bordered on restraint, refusing to speculate, redirecting questions toward documentation because speculation was the oxygen of misdirection, and he had learned that systems under pressure preferred chaos to clarity. Lisa messaged him mid-morning with updates from inside, the tone of her words more controlled than calm, describing meetings called without agendas, sudden policy reminders framed as wellness check-ins, and Dwayne recognized the choreography of institutional anxiety, the way organizations pretended concern while scanning for leaks, and he advised her to slow her responses, to become unremarkable, understanding that visibility could be both shield and target depending on timing. He left his apartment late, choosing crowds over solitude, and rode a bus across town not because it was efficient but because it forced proximity, a reminder of the ordinary stakes beneath his work, the conversations overheard about rent and school and weekend plans grounding him in a reality where harm was not abstract but cumulative. And he wondered how many people on that bus had been quietly managed by systems designed to protect reputations rather than lives. His destination was a small public library undergoing renovation, half its shelves empty, the other half relocated with apologetic signage, and he liked it for that reason because transition created gaps where attention drifted, and he set up at a corner table, spreading documents not to read but to observe, watching how people moved around information when they thought no one was watching them, and as he worked, he noticed a familiar presence, Evan, not approaching this time but visible across the room, reading nothing, waiting, and Dwayne felt a surge of irritation he tamped down, reminding himself that confrontation was rarely productive when power was asymmetrical. Instead, he packed his things deliberately and left, letting Evan follow at a distance, leading him through a route that ended at a community center hosting an open forum on workplace accountability, a public space thick with witnesses, and Evan peeled away before the entrance, choosing invisibility over exposure, and Dwayne filed the encounter away as confirmation that the network preferred control over conflict. Inside the forum, Dwayne listened rather than spoke, absorbing testimonies that echoed the patterns he had been documenting, the language of minimization repeated with different accents, and when he finally introduced himself, he did so without credentials, framing his work as curation rather than investigation, and the response was cautious but engaged, people asking not what he could do for them but how they could protect themselves, and he realized then that the creep detective was becoming less a persona and more a node, a point of connection rather than authority. The afternoon brought another escalation, his hosting provider issuing a formal notice citing vague concerns about liability, and Dwayne responded with documentation and patience, understanding that delay was their goal, and when that failed, silence, and he countered by mirroring their formality, each response meticulously polite, each attachment carefully labeled, turning their bureaucracy against itself. He met Harold Finch that evening at a quiet cafe that closed early, and Harold listened as Dwayne described the pressure points tightening, nodding slowly before offering a piece of advice that felt less tactical than philosophical, that endurance mattered more than impact in the long arc of exposure, that systems could outlast outrage but rarely outlast sustained attention. And Dwayne took that in, adjusting his expectations not downward but outward, seeing his role as one chapter in a story that refused to conclude neatly. Later, alone again, Dwayne received a message from an address he didn't recognize but whose tone he knew instantly, calm, almost collegial, suggesting a meeting not to negotiate but to clarify misunderstandings, and Dwayne stared at the screen longer than he meant to, weighing the cost of refusal against the risk of engagement, and he chose a third option, replying with questions rather than acceptance, setting terms without committing because control, he was learning, was often exercised through timing rather than action. The night deepened, and he reviewed the responses to his work, noting which critiques addressed substance and which attacked character, the latter predictable and therefore less concerning, and he drafted his next piece with deliberate restraint, focusing on process again, mapping how complaints were rerouted, how language shifted, responsibility without denying harm, and when he published, he did so without announcement, trusting that those who needed it would find it. The reaction was slower but deeper, a ripple rather than a splash, and as messages arrived from people who recognized themselves in the description, Dwayne felt the weight of stewardship settle heavier than before, the responsibility not just to expose but to hold, and he wondered briefly whether he had the capacity for that. Before deciding that capacity often followed commitment rather than preceding it, Near midnight, he stepped out onto his balcony, the city stretching indifferent and immense, and he thought about the door left ajar, the watchers who wanted him to feel small, and he realized that fear had not disappeared but changed shape, no longer paralyzing but sharpening, and as he stood there, he accepted that being the creep detective meant living without guarantees, without applause, and often without safety, but also with a clarity he had never known before, the clarity of refusing to unsee what had been revealed. And as he went back inside, locking the door with deliberate care, he prepared himself for the next turn in a story that had already outgrown him. Begins with the uneasy quiet that follows sustained attention, the kind of pause that suggests not relief but recalibration, and Dwayne Wayne felt it the moment he woke, the city outside his window unusually subdued as if holding its breath, and he understood that this was the interval in which systems adjusted, reassigned resources, and decided whether pressure warranted escalation or patience. He moved through his morning deliberately, not rushing, because haste had become another way to surrender control, and as he reviewed messages that had arrived overnight, he noted the subtle shift in tone, fewer outright warnings, more inquiries framed as curiosity, the network testing whether engagement might soften resistance where intimidation had not. Lisa's updates arrived in fragments, careful not to form a pattern that could be flagged, describing internal memos that emphasized alignment and loyalty, workshops on ethics scheduled with suspicious speed, and Dwayne recognized the theater of reform, the way institutions responded to critique by performing concern rather than addressing cause, and he advised her again to remain steady, to document rather than react, because reaction fed the narrative of instability they preferred. He left his apartment mid-morning and walked without destination, letting the city reassert itself, because grounding mattered when abstraction threatened to consume the work, and he found himself at a small park where parents watched children negotiate gravity and strangers shared benches without obligation, and he sat there longer than planned, reminding himself that the stakes of his work were measured not in headlines but in the quiet recalibration of what people tolerated. His phone buzzed with a message from Harold Finch requesting a meeting, and Dwayne agreed without hesitation, trusting Harold's sense of timing more than his own, and they met at the clinic after hours, the building stripped of daytime noise, and Harold spoke with uncharacteristic urgency, explaining that a former colleague had reached out, someone with access to archival material that predated the current network, records of how the system had learned to protect itself through trial and error, and Dwayne felt the familiar pull of origins, understanding that present patterns often made sense only when traced backward. The materials arrived that evening, scanned documents and handwritten notes that read like a field guide to institutional survival, detailing early failures, public scandals that had nearly toppled careers, and the lessons extracted from each crisis, and as Dwayne read, he felt a chill not from the content itself but from its clarity, the way harm had been itemized and mitigated without remorse, transformed into a management problem rather than a moral one. He worked late into the night annotating connections, careful not to romanticize the idea of exposure, because these documents weren't a smoking gun so much as a mirror, reflecting a culture that had refined indifference into policy, and he wondered how to present that without overwhelming the very people he hoped to reach. The next day brought another test, an invitation to speak on a small panel about digital accountability, framed as an opportunity to broaden the conversation, and Dwayne accepted after verifying the organizers, understanding that public presence was both risk and leverage, and he prepared not a speech but a set of questions because asking the right questions often unsettled power more effectively than statements. The panel unfolded without incident, the discussion measured and thoughtful, and Dwayne spoke briefly, emphasizing process over personalities, and afterward he noticed Evan again, this time not alone, flanked by two people who looked more like consultants than enforcers, and Evan approached with a practiced neutrality, congratulating him on his restraint, suggesting that maturity was evident in his evolving approach, and Dwayne responded politely, refusing both praise and provocation, and as they parted, Evan said quietly that stability was undervalued until it was lost, a remark that lingered not as a threat but as a diagnosis. The aftermath of the panel brought a wave of attention that Dwayne managed carefully, declining interviews that wanted conflict, accepting those that allowed nuance, and he felt the tension between accessibility and dilution, the risk that simplification would flatten the work into something more palatable and therefore less effective. And he chose complexity even when it cost reach, trusting that depth created its own audience. Lisa reported increased scrutiny at her firm, questions narrowing toward her department, and Dwayne sensed the window closing, advising her to secure backups and prepare contingencies, not dramatic exits but quiet redundancies, because resilience often depended on invisibility as much as courage. He spent the following days organizing the archival material into a framework that showed evolution rather than accusation, tracing how responses had hardened over time, and when he released the piece, he framed it as a study in institutional learning, letting readers draw conclusions without prompting, and the response was immediate and unsettled, not outrage but recognition, professionals from different sectors noting parallels, academics citing the work, and Dwayne felt the rare satisfaction of having contributed something durable rather than reactive. The pushback arrived in subtler forms: invitations rescinded, funding streams questioned, algorithms adjusting without explanation, and Dwayne documented each shift, understanding that friction was evidence of relevance, and he shared these observations transparently, demystifying the costs of sustained critique without dramatizing them. One evening, alone again, he received a call from the blocked number, the voice familiar now, measured and almost sympathetic, acknowledging that Dwayne had become more careful, more effective, and suggesting that effectiveness came with responsibility, that unintended consequences could ripple outward, and Dwayne listened, responding only to say that responsibility without accountability was merely control by another name, and the line went quiet, the negotiation unresolved. As the week closed, Dwayne felt the cumulative weight of attention and restraint, the constant calibration between exposure and protection, and he returned to the park where Part 6 had begun, watching the same rhythms repeat: children falling and rising, strangers sharing space without explanation, and he understood then that his work was not about dismantling a system in one decisive act but about widening the margin in which harm could be named without being erased. And as he stood to leave, his phone buzzed with a message from Lisa, brief and steady: "I'm still here," which felt like victory measured correctly, and Dwayne walked home under a sky that no longer felt undecided but expansive, accepting that the path ahead would demand endurance rather than triumph, and that being the creep detective meant committing to a pace that systems found difficult to counter, because persistence, once normalized, became a force of its own. Unfolds during a stretch of days that refused to announce themselves as important, the kind that slipped by under ordinary weather and routine noise. Yet Dwayne Wayne sensed almost immediately that this was the phase where pressure stopped testing boundaries and started reshaping terrain, because escalation did not always arrive with drama but with normalization, with the quiet assumption that certain constraints had already been accepted, and he woke each morning with that awareness pressing gently but persistently against his thoughts. Lisa's message, "I'm still here," stayed with him not as reassurance but as obligation, a reminder that visibility created gravity, pulling others into its field whether they asked for it or not, and he structured his days with greater intentionality, reducing movement patterns, varying routines, not out of paranoia but out of respect for the fact that attention, once earned, was rarely neutral. The first sign of the shift came through omission rather than action, a piece he published receiving no pushback at all, no flags, no counterstatements, nothing, and Dwayne recognized the tactic instantly, the strategic silence designed to deprive critique of oxygen, and he debated briefly whether to provoke a response before deciding that chasing reaction was a trap, that absence could be documented just as effectively as resistance. Instead, he focused on synthesis, revisiting the material he had accumulated over months, not to add volume but to distill patterns, and he began drafting a longer-form piece that traced the life cycle of institutional creep, how minor ethical compromises, left unchallenged, accumulated into normalized harm, and he wrote slowly, deliberately, refusing the urge to sharpen language into spectacle, because he had learned that spectacle attracted attention while clarity retained it. His workspace shifted from apartment to borrowed office space offered quietly by an academic who had followed his work, a neutral environment that reduced personal exposure while providing a different kind of legitimacy, and Dwayne accepted with caution, understanding that institutional proximity could be both shield and snare, and he made his terms clear: no editorial oversight, no branding, just space, and the agreement held for now. One afternoon while reviewing transcripts, he received a message from someone he did not recognize but whose tone carried the weight of long hesitation, a former junior employee within the network, now removed enough to speak but still afraid enough to hedge, and Dwayne responded with patience, not pushing for names or details, allowing the conversation to find its own pace, and over days it unfolded into a portrait of quiet coercion, not overt threats but career implications, the subtle conditioning that taught people to look away from discomfort because acknowledging it came with cost. And Dwayne felt again the familiar anger that arrived not at individual cruelty but at the systems that made such cruelty efficient. He met Harold Finch to discuss whether and how to incorporate anonymous testimony, and Harold advised restraint, suggesting that anonymity protected voices but also invited dismissal, and together they devised a method of corroboration that prioritized patterns over anecdotes, allowing individual stories to contribute without bearing the full burden of proof. And Dwayne appreciated the elegance of the approach, the way it balanced protection with rigor. The city outside continued its rhythms, indifferent and absorbing, and Dwayne took long walks to recalibrate, passing construction sites where old buildings were dismantled with careful choreography, each piece labeled and removed, and he thought about how destruction often required more planning than creation, how systems that had taken decades to solidify would not unravel quickly, and he adjusted his expectations again, measuring success not in outcomes but in resilience. Evan resurfaced not in person this time but through intermediaries, invitations to private roundtables framed as neutral discussions about ethics and innovation, and Dwayne declined each one politely, recognizing the attempt to fold him into a controlled environment where dissent could be managed, and he documented the invitations themselves, understanding that inclusion, when conditional, was another form of containment. Lisa reported that her position had shifted subtly, responsibilities reassigned under the guise of efficiency. Her access narrowed without explanation, and Dwayne felt the weight of that more keenly than any threat directed at him, because collateral pressure revealed the true stakes, and he encouraged her to preserve what she could without drawing attention, to treat the narrowing not as defeat but as data. The longer-form piece took shape slowly, each section building on the last, tracing how early warning signs were ignored, how language softened accountability, how processes optimized for discretion rather than care, and Dwayne resisted the temptation to name villains, focusing instead on mechanisms, trusting that readers were capable of inference, and when he finally shared a draft with a small circle of trusted reviewers, the feedback was cautious but affirming, noting the piece's density, its refusal to flatter, and he revised accordingly, sharpening clarity without sacrificing nuance. Publication day arrived without ceremony, no countdown, no teaser, just a quiet release into the channels he had cultivated. And the initial response was subdued, almost disappointingly so, until days later when citations began appearing in places he had not anticipated. Internal memos leaked referencing the framework, training sessions updated with language that mirrored his analysis without attribution, and Dwayne recognized the paradox of influence, that the most effective critique was often absorbed without acknowledgement, altering behavior while denying its source. The pushback evolved in parallel, not through suppression but through mimicry organizations, adopting the language of accountability while maintaining the same underlying practices, and Dwayne addressed this directly in a follow-up, naming the pattern of performative reform, not accusing but illustrating, and he felt the satisfaction of naming something that had long escaped articulation. Personally, the cost accumulated quietly, friendships strained by distance and distraction, nights fractured by half-sleep, and Dwayne confronted the possibility that this work would not resolve into a phase but a condition, and he questioned whether he was prepared for that, whether identity could stretch indefinitely without tearing, and he took comfort in the fact that doubt still accompanied him because certainty, he had learned, was the most dangerous comfort of all. One evening as he packed up at the borrowed office, he noticed someone waiting across the street, not hiding, not approaching, simply present, and he felt a flicker of adrenaline he acknowledged without indulging, choosing instead to leave through a different exit, not to evade but to assert agency, and the watcher did not follow, reinforcing his sense that the goal was awareness rather than capture. Conversations with Ron and Freddie grew quieter, less frequent but deeper, and when they spoke, it was with an understanding that explanations were unnecessary, that Dwayne's path was no longer hypothetical, and Freddie voiced a concern not about safety but about erosion, the slow narrowing of life around a single axis, and Dwayne listened, taking the warning seriously, resolving to preserve spaces untouched by the work, however imperfectly. Lisa's situation reached a tipping point when she was formally reassigned to a role that effectively sidelined her, and she framed it calmly in her message, but Dwayne heard the strain beneath, and together they discussed options that avoided martyrdom, exploring lateral moves rather than confrontations. And Dwayne felt again the limitation of his role, the reality that exposure did not automatically translate into protection. The block number called once more. The voice acknowledging the recent publication, conceding its sophistication, and suggesting that sophistication warranted dialogue at a higher level, and Dwayne declined again, stating simply that dialogue without accountability was rehearsal, and the line disconnected without ceremony, and he felt neither triumph nor relief, only the steady awareness that boundaries had been drawn and would now be tested. As Part 7 drew toward its close, Dwayne returned to the park where children still negotiated gravity and strangers shared benches, grounding himself in repetition, and he recognized that the work had changed him not by hardening but by clarifying, narrowing his tolerance for ambiguity that excused harm while expanding his patience for complexity that demanded effort. And he accepted that being the creep detective was less about pursuit than persistence, less about revelation than maintenance, the ongoing refusal to let discomfort be erased by convenience. And as he left the park under a sky streaked with the first hints of evening, he prepared himself for the next phase, aware that visibility would continue to attract both allies and pressures, and that the true measure of impact would be found not in resolution but in the widening space where silence once stood. Settles into a period where momentum becomes less visible but more consequential, the kind of stretch where outcomes are decided long before they are acknowledged. And Dwayne Wayne felt it in the way his days no longer revolved around immediate reaction but around maintenance, the careful tending of something that could easily collapse under neglect or haste, and he woke with a strange steadiness, not calm exactly but acceptance, as if his nervous system had finally learned the contours of this new normal. Lisa's reassignment had crystallized a truth he could no longer avoid, that influence rarely protected those closest to the fault lines, and he spent the morning reviewing contingency plans with her through carefully worded messages, discussing options that sounded like lateral moves but functioned as quiet exits, because survival, he had learned, was often less about confrontation than about repositioning, and he respected her insistence on leaving without spectacle, understanding that attention, while validating, could also calcify roles in ways that limited future agency. His own visibility had plateaued, no longer novel enough to provoke immediate response yet too persistent to ignore, and Dwayne recognized this as a threshold, the point at which critics were either absorbed, sidelined, or transformed into fixtures, and he considered which fate he was drifting toward, aware that permanence carried its own risks, that becoming predictable could be as dangerous as becoming irrelevant. He shifted focus again, this time toward infrastructure, building redundancies in his work that reduced dependence on any single platform or channel, distributing archives across trusted nodes, training a small group of collaborators in documentation standards, not to create an organization but a loose ecology, resilient precisely because it lacked a center, and as he did so he felt a subtle release, the burden of singular responsibility easing as the work became shared. One afternoon, while coordinating with a researcher in another city, he received an unexpected request from a regulatory body seeking clarification on points raised in his earlier publications, the tone neutral, the questions precise, and Dwayne paused before responding, recognizing the significance not of the request itself but of its formality, because institutions rarely asked unless they sensed pressure from multiple directions, and he crafted his response with care, sticking to evidence, refusing speculation, and documenting the exchange as meticulously as any field note. The days that followed brought similar signals, not overt validation but procedural engagement, the slow grinding attention of systems forced to acknowledge something they would rather manage quietly, and Dwayne resisted the urge to frame this as progress, reminding himself that acknowledgement did not equal change, that process could just as easily be used to deflect as to correct. Evan disappeared from his periphery entirely, no sightings, no intermediaries, no invitations, and the absence felt deliberate, a strategic withdrawal designed either to de-escalate or to reposition, and Dwayne noted it without relief, understanding that silence from power was rarely accidental and often temporary. Socially, his world had narrowed, not through dramatic breaks but through gentle erosion. Invitations declined by default, conversations abbreviated, and he made a conscious effort to preserve small rituals. Untouched by the work, weekly dinners with Ron when schedules aligned, long phone calls with Freddie that wandered into nostalgia and back out again, anchoring him to versions of himself that existed before the creep detective had become more than a name. The longer-form analysis he had published continued to surface in unexpected contexts, internal trainings, conference slides, policy drafts, always unattributed, and Dwayne grappled with a complicated satisfaction, knowing that influence without credit still mattered, but also that erasure was a familiar companion in stories like his, and he reminded himself that the goal had never been recognition but articulation, giving language to patterns that thrived in vagueness. Lisa's transition finalized quietly, her messages shifting from constrained to cautious optimism, and Dwayne felt a measure of relief tempered by realism, because exits solved individual pressure without dismantling systems, and he documented her experience not as a case study but as context. Another data point in a broader pattern of displacement framed as efficiency. A new voice entered his orbit through the collaborative network he had been nurturing, a data analyst who had begun mapping complaint resolution timelines across sectors, revealing statistically what Dwayne had observed narratively, that delay correlated strongly with attrition, and together they worked to integrate qualitative and quantitative perspectives, strengthening the work's defensibility without sacrificing its human core. And Dwayne appreciated the discipline this required, the way numbers imposed constraints that sharpened rather than dulled insight. Public response shifted again, not louder but more engaged, questions deepening, critiques becoming more substantive, and Dwayne welcomed the friction, because disagreement grounded in evidence felt like progress compared to dismissal or ad hominem attacks, and he spent hours responding thoughtfully, not to persuade but to clarify, accepting that persuasion was often a byproduct rather than an objective. The blocked number did not return, replaced instead by indirect signals, policy proposals echoing his language, media pieces gesturing vaguely toward systemic issues without attribution, and Dwayne interpreted this as partial absorption, the system metabolizing critique to strengthen itself, and he confronted the uncomfortable reality that exposure could reinforce structures even as it challenged them, and he adjusted accordingly, focusing less on revelation and more on countermapping, highlighting how reform narratives could be co-opted. Personally, fatigue accumulated in subtler ways, not burnout but dulling, and Dwayne instituted boundaries that felt artificial at first, time limits on research, days without documentation, and he discovered that stepping back occasionally sharpened rather than weakened his perspective, allowing patterns to re-emerge with fresh clarity. One evening, walking home through streets alive with ordinary concerns, he passed a small protest outside a corporate building, signs held by people whose grievances would likely never reach headlines, and he stood there briefly, anonymous among them, feeling the strange duality of his position, both participant and observer, and he wondered how many stories intersected invisibly beneath public narratives, how many acts of quiet resistance went unrecorded, and the thought reaffirmed his commitment to the unglamorous work of documentation. As Part 8 drew toward its end, Dwayne found himself less reactive to threats and more attentive to subtleties, shifts in language, timing, omission, and he recognized this as a maturation not just of strategy but of self, the acceptance that this work would never conclude neatly, that it demanded a long view incompatible with urgency-driven heroics, and he embraced that constraint, seeing in it a form of sustainability. The city continued its indifferent pulse, absorbing critique and commerce alike, and Dwayne moved within it with a quieter confidence, no longer chasing validation or fearing disappearance, focused instead on continuity, on ensuring that what had been seen could not easily be unseen again. And as he closed his notebook one evening, the pages thick with connections rather than conclusions, he acknowledged that the most significant shifts often happen beneath perception, accumulating until denial required more effort than acknowledgement, and that was where he now aimed his work, in that uncomfortable space where systems were forced to feel the weight of their own contradictions. Begins not with a new threat or revelation but with a subtle inversion of pressure, the moment when attention, once directed outward, turns inward, and Dwayne Wayne became aware of it during an ordinary morning when he found himself rereading his own work not for errors but for tone, wondering how much of his voice had been shaped by resistance rather than intention, and the realization unsettled him more than any anonymous warning ever had, because it suggested that influence was no longer a one-way force but a feedback loop, reshaping the observer alongside the observed. The city outside continued its indifferent choreography, traffic patterns unchanged, sirens punctuating the air without urgency, and Dwayne recognized that this stability was itself deceptive, a sign that deeper shifts were happening at levels not easily perceived, and he resolved to slow his output deliberately, creating space for reflection not as retreat but as recalibration. Messages from collaborators arrived. Steadily, not urgent but cumulative, datasets updated, testimonies refined, cross-sector comparisons revealing convergences that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. And Duane spent hours synthesizing rather than publishing, letting insights mature beyond initial clarity, because he had learned that premature articulation could flatten complexity into something easily co-opted. A new dynamic emerged in public discourse, commentators adopting his frameworks while stripping them of critique, turning structural analysis into neutral management language, and Duane addressed this obliquely in private conversations rather than public rebuttals, recognizing that overt correction often amplified the very dilution he sought to counter, and instead he focused on deepening the original analysis, adding layers that resisted simplification, trusting that those willing to engage seriously would follow. Lisa's absence from the network created an unexpected effect. A small but noticeable gap in the flow of information that forced Duane to confront how dependent parts of his work had been on individual access, and he took this as instruction rather than loss, accelerating efforts to diversify sources and perspectives, building a mosaic rather than a pipeline, and the work grew messier but more resilient as a result. One afternoon, he received an invitation that differed from those before, a request to consult quietly on policy revision. No publicity, no attribution. Framed explicitly as listening rather than endorsement, and Duane hesitated longer than usual, weighing the risk of legitimizing performative reform against the opportunity to shape outcomes materially, and he accepted conditionally, insisting on transparency about limitations, understanding that refusal could preserve purity but surrender leverage. The consultation unfolded over several sessions, technical and restrained, and Duane noted how language shifted in response to sustained questioning, how certain assumptions crumbled when examined patiently rather than attacked, and while he remained skeptical of motives, he acknowledged the incremental value of intervention, the way small adjustments could alter trajectories even if they fell short of transformation. Evan resurfaced indirectly during this period, not as a presence but as an absence explained, his role apparently reassigned, his influence redistributed, and Duane recognized the pattern of sacrifice without accountability. Individuals moved to preserve structures, and he documented the change without commentary, letting the pattern speak for itself. Personally, the cost of sustained engagement manifested in unexpected ways, not anxiety or fear but detachment, a creeping tendency to see interactions as data rather than connection, and Duane confronted this honestly, reaching out to friends without agenda, forcing himself into conversations where analysis had no utility, and he found relief in that limitation, the reminder that not everything needed to be understood to be valued. The work itself reached a new phase as collaborators began producing independent analyses using shared frameworks, critiques branching beyond Duane's direct involvement, and he felt a mix of pride and unease, recognizing that decentralization was success by his own standards yet also a relinquishing of control, and he embraced the contradiction, understanding that durability required letting go. Resistance adapted accordingly, less focused on him as an individual and more on managing the discourse broadly. Think pieces framing systemic harm as an inevitable byproduct of complexity, calls for patience replacing calls for accountability, and Duane countered this not with urgency but with persistence, publishing follow-ups that traced how appeals to complexity had historically delayed reform, grounding arguments in documented timelines rather than rhetoric. The block number remained silent, replaced instead by a different form of attention, subtle social signals, invitations extended and withdrawn, access granted and quietly limited, and Duane learned to read these movements as weather rather than messages, conditions to be navigated rather than puzzles to be solved. One evening, walking through a neighborhood far from his usual routes, he noticed a mural being painted over, layers of color disappearing beneath uniform gray, and he paused to watch, struck by how erasure often presented itself as improvement, and the image stayed with him as he returned home, thinking about how systems repainted themselves to appear neutral while burying contested histories, and he resolved to incorporate this metaphor explicitly in his next piece, not as flourish but as framing. The publication that followed was his most restrained yet, a meditation on erasure disguised as efficiency, tracing how reforms often removed visible conflict while preserving underlying harm, and the response was quieter than before but deeper. Long messages from readers grappling with recognition, institutional replies more cautious, less defensive, and Dwayne sensed that the work was settling into a space where reaction was no longer reflexive but considered. Fatigue still lingered, but it had transformed into something manageable, a reminder rather than a warning, and Dwayne adjusted his pace accordingly, accepting that sustainability required ongoing negotiation rather than fixed balance. As Part 9 drew to a close, he recognized that the most significant change was internal, a shift from proving to sustaining, from exposure to stewardship, and he accepted that the creep detective was no longer a role defined by pursuit but by continuity, the ongoing effort to keep patterns visible despite constant pressure to normalize them away. And as he sat at his desk, city lights flickering on one by one, he felt neither victorious nor defeated, only present, anchored in a long horizon where impact was measured not by immediate outcomes but by the gradual narrowing of plausible denial. And with that awareness settled, he prepared to move forward into the next phase, knowing it would demand not sharper tactics but deeper patience. Arrives at a moment when tension no longer announces itself through confrontation but through expectation, the sense that something unresolved has matured enough to demand form. And Dwayne Wayne felt that demand in the way his mornings began without urgency yet carried a persistent weight, as if the work itself were waiting for him to decide what shape it would take next. The feedback loops he had been monitoring had stabilized into something more durable. His frameworks circulating independently, referenced obliquely, debated quietly, and he recognized this as the threshold between influence and legacy, a line he had never intended to approach but now found himself standing on nonetheless. He resisted the temptation to consolidate, to brand or formalize the network that had grown around the work, understanding that structure invited capture, and instead he focused on reinforcing principles, documentation standards, ethical constraints that could travel without him, and he spent days refining these not as rules but as questions, prompts that forced future collaborators to interrogate their own assumptions before publishing anything under the shared logic. The city outside continued to absorb everything, critique and commerce layered without comment, and Dwayne took comfort in its indifference, because it reminded him that no single effort could dominate the narrative for long. That durability required integration rather than disruption. Lisa checked in sporadically now, her new position distant enough to allow perspective, and she shared observations without urgency, noting how the language of reform had begun to outpace actual change, how metrics were adjusted to suggest improvement without altering outcomes, and Dwayne incorporated these insights into his ongoing analysis, careful not to center any individual story but to preserve the pattern intact. An unexpected development emerged through the regulatory inquiry he had engaged with earlier, a follow-up request for clarification that indicated not just review but internal disagreement, factions within the institution interpreting his work differently, and Dwayne recognized the opportunity inherent in ambiguity, responding with precision that left room for interpretation, allowing reform-minded actors to leverage his analysis without handing opponents a single target to dismantle. Evans' name surfaced again, not attached to him directly but referenced in a leaked organizational reshuffle, his departure framed as strategic realignment, and Dwayne felt a momentary satisfaction quickly tempered by realism, because displacement without accountability rarely altered culture, and he documented the change as another instance of structural preservation through individual sacrifice. Personally, Dwayne confronted a quieter reckoning, the realization that his life had narrowed not through loss but through choice, that many of the distractions he once valued no longer fit the tempo of his days, and he questioned whether this narrowing was a cost or a refinement, ultimately deciding it was both, a trade-off he continued to renegotiate rather than resolve. He began mentoring a small group of researchers more intentionally, not to replicate his approach but to challenge it, encouraging critique of his assumptions, inviting disagreement, and he found that this friction sharpened his own thinking, preventing the calcification that came with unchecked authority, and he took this as a sign that the work was evolving beyond him in healthy ways. Public discourse shifted subtly again, commentators no longer dismissing systemic harm outright but reframing it as a problem of optimization, a vocabulary that suggested inevitability rather than responsibility, and Dwayne addressed this indirectly, publishing a piece that traced how language itself functioned as infrastructure, shaping what solutions seemed possible, and the response was thoughtful, slower, indicating that the audience engaging with his work had become smaller but more invested. The block number never returned, replaced instead by a diffuse awareness that lines had been drawn and accepted, and Dwayne understood that he had moved from being a variable to a constant, a condition the system had learned to accommodate rather than eliminate, and he considered whether that was enough, whether accommodation without transformation risked becoming complicity, and he held that question without rushing to answer it. One evening, walking through a neighborhood undergoing rapid change, he watched an old building being converted into something sleek and anonymous, its history sanded down to appeal to a broader market, and the image resonated deeply, reinforcing his sense that erasure often masqueraded as progress, and he resolved to anchor his future work even more firmly in memory, preserving traces that resisted smooth narratives. The next publication reflected this shift, less analytical and more archival, weaving together fragments from different eras to show continuity rather than novelty. And the reception was mixed, some readers frustrated by the absence of clear conclusions, others grateful for the refusal to simplify, and Dwayne accepted the division as evidence that the work was asking more of its audience than before. Fatigue returned intermittently, but he managed it with greater honesty, acknowledging limits, stepping back without guilt, trusting that the network he had helped cultivate could carry momentum without his constant input, and he discovered that relinquishing control did not diminish impact but redistributed it. As Part 10 settled into its final rhythm, Dwayne reflected on how far the work had drifted from its origins, from tailing individuals through parking structures to mapping systems that thrived on invisibility, and he felt neither nostalgia nor regret, only a sober recognition that curiosity, once pursued with discipline, inevitably widened its scope. He sat one night at his desk, the city lit below, and reviewed the early notes where he had first written the phrase "the creep detective" almost as a joke, and he smiled faintly, understanding now that the title had never referred to him alone but to a stance, a refusal to accept discomfort as imaginary, a commitment to notice what others learned to ignore, and as he closed the notebook, he felt the story approaching another inflection point, one that would demand not more exposure but a reckoning with permanence, with what it meant to sustain critique without becoming predictable or safe. The city hummed, indifferent and alive, and Dwayne accepted that the work ahead would require a different kind of courage, less reactive and more patient, the courage to remain present in a system that preferred forgetting, and with that acceptance, he prepared himself for what came next, aware that the question was no longer whether he would continue, but how. Begins at the point where continuation itself becomes a choice rather than an impulse, and Dwayne Wayne felt that distinction with unusual clarity as he moved through a week that contained no immediate deadlines, no pressing threats, only the slow pressure of expectation, the sense that whatever came next would define not just the work but the shape of the years it would occupy. He noticed how people now spoke to him differently, less curious and more careful, as if he had crossed an invisible threshold from commentator to fixture, and that realization unsettled him more than hostility ever had, because fixtures could be worked around, absorbed, even ignored with enough patience. The city mirrored this feeling, familiar streets altered by incremental changes that only registered when viewed over time. A new cafe replacing a closed clinic, murals replaced by neutral tones, progress that felt suspiciously quiet, and Dwayne found himself thinking often about erasure, not as an act but as a process, the gradual smoothing of friction until memory lost its edge. The network he had helped cultivate continued to function without him at its center, analyses emerging from collaborators who challenged and extended the frameworks he had introduced, and Dwayne resisted the urge to intervene, understanding that autonomy was the truest test of durability, and he limited his role to questions rather than corrections, a shift that felt both liberating and disorienting. Regulatory engagement deepened in subtle ways, follow-up meetings scheduled without publicity, requests for clarification framed as implementation concerns, and Dwayne recognized the dual nature of these interactions, the possibility of genuine reform coexisting with the risk of co-optation, and he approached each exchange with disciplined restraint, documenting not just outcomes but language, noting how commitments softened as they moved from draft to policy, how accountability morphed into aspiration, and he shared these observations quietly with trusted collaborators, treating transparency as a prophylactic against naivete. Lisa's distance from the center of the network gave her a vantage point that proved unexpectedly valuable, her messages reflecting a long view, patterns repeating across organizations that claimed uniqueness, and Dwayne incorporated her insights into a private archive rather than public output, recognizing that some knowledge functioned better as ballast than ammunition. Evan remained absent, his name now shorthand within certain circles for a style of intervention that had fallen temporarily out of favor, and Dwayne noted how quickly individuals became symbols once removed, how narratives adjusted to preserve continuity, and he added this to his growing catalog of displacement without reckoning. Personally, Dwayne confronted a quieter erosion, not of resolve but of spontaneity, the way his mind habitually parsed interactions for subtext, and he made a conscious effort to resist this outside the work, allowing conversations to remain unresolved, jokes to pass without analysis, and he found this resistance unexpectedly difficult, a reminder that vigilance, even when justified, exacted its own cost. He traveled briefly, not far, just enough to disrupt routine, and in unfamiliar neighborhoods he observed the same patterns repeating under different accents, similar mechanisms of silence and normalization, and the universality of it struck him. With renewed force, the realization that what he had been tracing was less a conspiracy than a tendency, an emergent property of systems optimized for stability over care. During this period, he received a message from a former critic, someone who had initially dismissed his work as alarmist, now writing with measured curiosity, asking for clarification on a point that had become relevant in their own institution. And Dwayne responded without defensiveness, recognizing the quiet victory in that shift, the way skepticism could evolve into engagement without apology, and he filed the exchange away as evidence. That impact often traveled backward through resistance before emerging as understanding. Publication slowed by design, longer intervals between pieces allowing space for digestion, and when he did release new work, it leaned further into historical continuity, drawing lines across decades rather than reacting to current events, and the audience that followed grew smaller still but more durable, readers who returned not for novelty but for grounding, and Dwayne accepted this narrowing as alignment rather than loss. The blocked number never reappeared, replaced instead by a diffuse sense of monitoring that no longer sought to intimidate but to anticipate, and Dwayne adapted by becoming less predictable, not in tactics but in timing, allowing silence to function as strategy, withholding response until patterns clarified, and he found that this patience unsettled those accustomed to managing crisis through reaction. Conversations with Ron and Freddie deepened into reflections on time, on how paths once imagined diverged quietly from those actually taken, and Dwayne listened more than he spoke, aware that his work had begun to dominate his narrative, and he resisted letting it eclipse other dimensions of his life, even as he acknowledged that it would never fully recede. The question of permanence pressed more insistently now, not whether the work would continue but how it would age, whether it would calcify into doctrine or remain responsive. And Dwayne confronted this by formalizing uncertainty within the frameworks themselves, embedding prompts that required future users to interrogate context rather than apply conclusions wholesale, and he took comfort in the idea that adaptability could be designed, not just hoped for. Institutional responses grew more sophisticated, language aligning ever closer to his critiques while outcomes lagged, and Dwayne addressed this gap explicitly in a piece that examined the life cycle of reform narratives, how they rose, plateaued, and were eventually replaced without resolving underlying harm, and the response was subdued but serious, the kind that suggested discomfort rather than dismissal. Fatigue resurfaced, not acute but cumulative, and Dwayne acknowledged it openly with collaborators, modeling limitation rather than endurance, and he found that this honesty strengthened rather than weakened the network, allowing others to step forward without framing it as rescue. One evening, sorting through early notes, he encountered recordings from the beginning, the courthouse steps, the parking structure, the listening device he had planted almost impulsively, and he felt a distance from that version of himself, not superiority but compassion, recognizing how narrow the frame had once been, how necessary that narrowness had been to begin at all, and he understood that every phase of the work had required its own kind of blindness. The city outside continued its layered existence, histories stacked and sanded down, and Dwayne took long walks without documentation, letting observation exist without capture, and he discovered that even without recording, patterns remained visible, that the work had rewired his perception in ways that could not be undone. As Part 11 moved toward its close, the sense of approaching resolution lingered not as climax but as convergence, threads drawn tight enough to suggest an ending without dictating its form, and Dwayne accepted that whatever conclusion awaited would likely be understated, a shift in conditions rather than a dramatic reckoning, and he prepared himself for that humility, understanding that stories about systems rarely ended with justice neatly delivered but with space widened just enough for future resistance to breathe. He sat one night with the lights off, city glow filtering in, and considered whether he would choose this path again knowing what it required, and the answer arrived without ceremony, not as certainty but as acknowledgement that he had not chosen it so much as failed to turn away once he understood what he was seeing, and that failure, he realized, was the truest definition of commitment he knew. With that recognition settled, Dwayne felt ready for whatever final articulation the work demanded, aware that the next step would not be louder or sharper but more definitive, not because it promised resolution but because it would mark a transition from building to bearing, from investigation to inheritance, and as the night deepened, he closed his notebook with deliberate care, knowing that the question was no longer how to expose creepiness in systems, but how to live honestly in the long aftermath of having named it. Unfolds without fanfare because endings of this kind rarely announce themselves, and Dwayne Wayne understood that if this was to be a conclusion, it would not arrive as a revelation but as a settling, the slow recognition that the work had reached a state where continuation no longer depended on his momentum alone. He woke earlier than usual during this period, not from anxiety but from habit, his mind already arranging fragments into provisional meaning, and he allowed himself the rare indulgence of not recording them immediately, trusting that what mattered would return, and this trust marked a quiet shift, a loosening of the grip he had maintained for years. The city outside continued its steady improvisation, construction and decay woven together so seamlessly that it required intention to distinguish one from the other, and Dwayne took long walks through neighborhoods he had once documented obsessively, now observing without annotation, noticing how familiarity altered perception, how once suspicious patterns could fade into background if vigilance softened, and this awareness sharpened his resolve to design work that resisted normalization even as time passed. The network he had helped nurture had matured into something decentralized and resilient, conversations unfolding without his participation, disagreements resolved through shared reference points rather than authority, and Dwayne watched this from a deliberate distance, experiencing a complex mixture of relief and humility because influence without control felt like both success and erasure, and he learned to accept that legacy often manifested as absence rather than presence. Institutional responses had reached a predictable equilibrium, reforms announced with careful language, oversight mechanisms adjusted just enough to demonstrate responsiveness, and Dwayne recognized that the system had done what it always did when confronted with sustained critique. It had absorbed the pressure and redistributed it, and rather than reacting with frustration, he documented this phase as thoroughly as the earlier ones, understanding that normalization itself was a data point, a stage worthy of examination rather than lament. Lisa's final message before she moved on to another role was brief and unceremonious, noting simply that patterns repeated until interrupted by something truly incompatible, and Dwayne read this several times, recognizing its quiet truth, that disruption required not intensity but difference, a refusal to play by inherited rules, and he carried this insight into the framing of his final public piece. Evan's story concluded without spectacle, his name now rarely invoked, replaced by abstract references to past mistakes, and Dwayne noted how quickly accountability dissolved into cautionary myth, how individuals became placeholders for lessons never fully learned, and he included this phenomenon in his closing analysis, careful to anonymize without obscuring the mechanism at work. Personally, Dwayne confronted the question he had deferred for so long: what remained when the work no longer demanded constant vigilance? And he found that the answer was not emptiness but a quieter attentiveness, an ability to engage with people and places without immediately mapping them onto theory. And this rediscovery felt less like returning to an earlier self and more like integrating something new, a synthesis rather than a retreat. He began writing less frequently but more deliberately, each piece positioned not as intervention but as record, a way of preserving knowledge that might otherwise be smoothed away by institutional memory loss, and he accepted that these writings would likely be read slowly, out of sequence, by people seeking grounding rather than guidance, and this acceptance freed him from the pressure of immediacy. The final publication he prepared was unlike the others, not an exposé or framework but a reflection on attention itself, on how systems relied on distraction as much as deception, how harm often persisted not because it was hidden but because it was tedious to confront, and he traced this dynamic across decades, weaving together policy language, cultural shifts, and personal observation into a narrative that resisted simplification. And when it was released, the response was subdued, thoughtful, lacking the spikes of outrage that once accompanied his work, and Duane recognized this as appropriate, even necessary, because outrage burned quickly while understanding endured. Fatigue still surfaced, but it no longer carried guilt, and Duane allowed himself rest without framing it as failure, modeling for collaborators a sustainable relationship to critique, one that acknowledged limits without surrendering responsibility, and he found that this posture invited others to do the same, strengthening the collective by preventing burnout masquerading as commitment. Conversations with Ron and Freddie drifted toward ordinary matters, shared memories, speculative futures, and Duane noticed how the gravitational pull of the work loosened its hold on these interactions, allowing space for humor and contradiction, and he valued this rebalancing, recognizing that a life narrowed entirely around vigilance risked becoming another kind of system, rigid and unyielding. The city continued to change, buildings repurposed, histories rebranded, and Duane documented one last walk through a corridor he had studied extensively, noting not what had been lost but what had been reframed, how language on plaques and promotional materials shifted responsibility away from decision-makers and toward abstract forces, and he included these observations in his archive rather than public output, trusting future readers to draw their own conclusions. As the weeks passed, Duane felt a growing clarity about what this ending required, not a declaration of victory or defeat but an articulation of inheritance, a recognition that the work belonged now to those who would encounter it without knowing its origin story. And he structured his final notes accordingly, foregrounding questions rather than answers, context rather than conclusions, and he embedded within them an explicit acknowledgement of uncertainty, a refusal to present any framework as complete. The blocked number, the threats, the surveillance that once loomed large now felt distant, not because risk had vanished but because it no longer defined the work's horizon, and Duane accepted that safety was never the endpoint, only a condition, negotiated along the way, and this acceptance allowed him to release the vigilance that had once been necessary but could no longer be sustained indefinitely. One evening, he returned to the earliest notebook where the phrase "the creep detective" had first appeared, written half in jest, half in irritation, and he read through the cramped handwriting, the narrow focus, the certainty that exposure would produce change, and he felt no embarrassment, only gratitude for the naivety that had made beginning possible, and he understood that every long project depended on an initial misunderstanding of its scope. The final days of this phase passed quietly, Duane organizing files, transferring access, ensuring redundancy not as control but as care, and he experienced a subtle grief, not for the work itself but for the intensity that had once structured his days, and he allowed that grief to exist without dramatization, understanding that endings often felt anticlimactic precisely because they resolved tension rather than escalating it. When he finally stepped back fully, the absence of constant analysis created space for reflection, and Duane noticed how his perception had permanently shifted, how he could no longer move through institutions or narratives without sensing the undercurrents he had spent years tracing, and he accepted this as the lasting imprint of the work, the way it would accompany him regardless of public output. The city at night remained indifferent and luminous, a reminder that no single story ever contained its full complexity, and Duane found comfort in that, because it meant the work had never been about mastery but about participation, a commitment to notice, to question, to resist the convenience of forgetting. In his final reflection, which he did not publish but shared privately with those closest to the work, he wrote that the true danger was not creepiness itself but the moment it became familiar, the point at which discomfort was reframed as normal, and he urged readers to treat unease not as an inconvenience to be managed but as information to be honored. As this final part settles into place, there is no curtain call, no decisive reckoning, only a widening of space, a recognition that the investigation has become a condition rather than a project, and Duane Wayne steps back not because the work is finished but because it has learned to continue without him, and in that continuation lies its quiet victory, not the eradication of harm but the persistence of attention, the refusal to look away once something has been seen, and if this is ending, it is one that resists closure, offering instead a handoff, an invitation to those who come next to notice what feels wrong, to name it carefully, and to remain present long enough for change to become possible. This is where the creep detective rests, not concluded but carried forward, And with that, the story releases its hold, asking not for agreement or applause but for awareness. And now I ask you, are you satisfied with this final part?